Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. Pardon that little catch in my throat there. It's that time of year and I'm down here in the south where it's real humid. Also where we get a lot of rain. But anyway, today I'm going to be having Andrea Perron here, and she has spent several years of her childhood in a house that had a lot of poltergeist activity, and she has written, I know at least one book, maybe more, about this, and I've invited her here to tell her story about this and tell a little something about her book and give you guys a chance to, see what y'all think about it. As I understand, the Warrens, actually Lorraine and, I keep forgetting Mr. Warren's first name for some reason. I know he knew Johnny Zaffis, and I remember Lorraine, but I just never talked to Mr. Warren. I think it was Ed Warren enough to remember. I was right. I got it. I don't know why, but I keep wanting to say Ed or Lawrence, and I keep getting them confused. But at any rate, Ed and Lorraine had went out there and investigated the house, and they found that it indeed had a lot of paranormal activity, and if I understand correctly, it still has it to this day. But before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that this show is being broadcast from www.talknowradio.com because Paranormal Palace Radio got hacked, and it's not fully up and functional at this point. I still got a couple of bugs starring out of the new site, and I'm working on it. But in the meantime, until I get my regular site back, this is where I'll be broadcasting. It's a temporary instead of simulcasting at both places. Now, if y'all want to know a little bit more about Andrea, you can go to www.houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com, and she'll have all kinds of articles and information for you, as well as links to where you can get her book. You can also scroll down under the chat room, and you can get the information to, where you can purchase the book right underneath her description. And in all honesty, folks, I don't have my number right in front of me, so I'm going to do this by memory and hope I get it right, because I had it on the home page of the other site. I thought I moved it over here, but evidently I must not have. But I want to say it was 832-632-7904 if y'all want to call in and ask questions. Y'all can always ask questions in chat. So, in the meantime, let's talk to Andrea and get the show on the road. Andrea, how are you doing today?
I am very well, sweetie. Thank you so much for inviting me, and hello to all of your listeners. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I want to thank you for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you, and I've really been looking forward to this because, it's not often you meet somebody that lives in even on the phone or, on the Internet, in a house with this kind of poltergeist activity, like, say, the Bell Witch House, for example, and other ones like that. So this is kind of a treat for me. Well,
Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated our house in the early 70s. We moved in. We bought the house in 1970, and we moved out in 1980. So our family was there for a full decade. And Ed and Lorraine have pursued us. Well, Ed passed away, sadly, a number of years ago, but Lorraine kept right at it because she and Ed have both said in numerous locations, in print and in the spoken word, that the investigation that they did at the Perron house in Harrisville, Rhode Island, was, and these are their words, the most compelling, most intense, and most significant investigation they conducted in a 50-year career of ghost hunting. And because of the really incredible things that happened to our family in that house, we waited 30 years to tell our story. Essentially, we needed the world to catch up with us. We wanted to be taken seriously. We did not want to be further scrutinized than we had been, and we wanted people to believe us. And so for 30 years, we didn't talk about it with anyone. We didn't give our permission to the Warrens to do a film or do a book or do anything around this story because we needed to process what happened to us My mother and father and my 4 sisters and myself lived in that house for a full decade, and in that amount of time, we saw things that are literally empirical evidence for the existence of a 4th dimension. I have a quantum physicist who has kindly reviewed the trilogy of books that I've written. Volume 2 is coming out within a week or so. Volume 1's been on the market a little bit over a year now, and then Volume 3 will come out in the spring, just prior to the film opening. 3 years ago this week, I gave Lorraine Warren and Warner Brothers Pictures permission to use some of my material and to, of course, use their material from their case files. And they have created a remarkable film. It's called The Conjuring. It will be out. It premieres in New York City on July 19th, 2013. And it was supposed to, it's done, and they were supposed to premiere it in January. However, the studio was so blown away by the test marketing on it that they decided to put it in summer blockbuster position. We have not seen the film yet. Of course, they took liberties. Of course, it's Hollywood. When we went out, our family went out to the set in Wilmington, North Carolina last March, and they were very wonderful. James Wan is the director of the film, and it stars Vera Farmiga, Ron Livingston as Vera Farmiga plays Lorraine Warren, and Patrick Wilson plays Ed Warren. And we got to meet with them, and we got to meet with the entire cast and crew, the 5 little girls that play us. It was surreal, let me tell you. I mean, to have a film made of your life while you're still living to see it is a remarkable thing, and it doesn't happen often, you know. So we're all still kind of pinching ourselves around this. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, they openly admitted they took a few liberties here and there. So if you want to know the entire story that happened to our family, you have to read the books. And it's a trilogy, so there's plenty of time yet before the film actually starts. But House of Darkness, House of Light is way more than a series of scary stories. It is the history of the house. It is the history of the spirits in the house. Yes, we had poltergeist activity. We also had demonic activity. We had one particular spirit that Mrs. Warren said was Bathsheba Sherman, who had been tried and not really tried. There was an inquest because she had, in the 1800s, early 1800s, she had apparently was accused of performing a satanic ritual on an infant that was in her care. And the baby died, and when they found, during the doctor's examination, found that a needle had been impaled in the base of its skull.
Ooh.
And had convulsions and died. And even though she was called before a court and there was an inquest, of course, it was well before the existence of any DNA evidence or that type of thing. And so she was not exonerated, but she was let off the hook because, much like Lizzie Borden, she talked her way out of it and said she was not responsible for this. But the people in the area, that part of Rhode Island, never let her live it down. She lived a long, long, miserable life. And the word was it, the folklore was that she had sacrificed this baby to Satan in exchange for eternal youth and beauty. She was, as a young woman, a radiantly beautiful woman. And so the women in town were very threatened by her. The men looked at her with rapacious eyes. She had a reputation, and she never lived it down. And interestingly, she died in 1885. And that when the doctor did the examination of her body, it was written in the newspaper that he had never seen anything like it, that her body had literally turned to stone. She died of paralysis. An amazing story, absolutely amazing story. So she was dubbed a witch. people, and it was about 100 years after Salem had occurred, the witch trials of Salem. But that was just up the road from where we lived. That was like an hour and a half drive from where we lived. Had she been, lived in just a slightly earlier time, she could have, who knows what could have happened to her. But my father doesn't even believe that she's the one that's doing the haunting in the house. He thinks that it's Mrs. John Arnold.
Really?
Because when she speaks, her language is so archaic that he doesn't think that Bathsheba would have spoken in such archaic English. And also the apparition that would appear to us, she was hideously ugly. There are no words to really describe how vile she appeared. And her neck is clearly broken in her full body apparition. So since Bathsheba did not die of a broken neck, did not hang herself, but died of supposedly supernatural causes, my father thinks that it's Mrs. Arnold, and of course we'll never know. It's part of the mystery of the story itself. But there were at least, and I am no exaggeration, at least a dozen viable, malleable, communicative spirits that co-dwelled and co-mingled with our family for 10 years.
Wow, that's an awful lot.
Yes, it was. I mean, we had children, we had elderly people, we had animals, we had, when you walk into your bathroom in the morning and you see a cat that you don't own run through a solid wall where there used to be a door, it's a wake-up call. It truly is. I mean, we had a dog that wasn't ours. We had a cat that was, at least two cats that weren't ours, that were no longer among the living, but that never left that house. And the thing that the Warrens found so fascinating and that they insisted for all these years was that the house is a portal. It is a portal to the past, but it is also a portal to the future. And why the quantum physicists are going so crazy with this story is because there are literally, it requires a leap of faith in certain respects to accept what happened to our family. Every single word that is written in these books is true, absolutely true. My 74-year-old mother will attest to the fact. My 76-year-old father will attest to the fact. I just turned 54. When we moved into that house, I was 12. I can tell you one thing only. There is something beyond our mortal existence. Spirit is real. It does exist. But I can't give you any more information at 54 than I could at 12 years old about exactly what it is, about its point of origin. I do know that whenever we were in trouble, and we were frequently in trouble, we were frequently under attack from one cause or another in that house, one spirit or another, if we prayed wholeheartedly, it would stop. And Mrs. Warren always said to us, say these words, girls, say these words. In the name of Jesus Christ, go back to where you came from. Leave us in peace. Well, she taught us to say that, but that didn't actually work. What worked was, oh God, please make it stop. When your visceral reaction to an onslaught is so intense that you make a direct connection with your maker, that's powerful prayer, whether you're screaming it or you're saying it in complete sense in your head. And every single one of us went through an experience where we begged for help, to be let loose, let out of a place we were trapped, for us to stop being hit or abused. My sister Cindy had several incidents where she was caught up in a whirlwind that was so severe that the objects that were around her were literally impacting her body. It goes on and on. I mean, I didn't put everything in the book. I'll tell you what, Royce, there were things that happened in that house that nobody outside of our own family is ever going to know about. But you got about 95% of it in House of Darkness, House of Light. And anybody that is, intuitive or has an acute awareness of what spirits are capable of can read between the lines and figure out what's missing. But my sisters, whether it be in interview or even in the written word, there are just some things that none of us are going to share.
Right.
And the producers of the film understood that. I gave them a great deal of information to work with. So even though we haven't seen the film yet, we hope that they have done what they said that they would do, which was to stick as factually to the story as they could. My mother was the one that was truly under siege in the house. My mother was under attack from the day we moved in to the day we moved out. And it's because whoever that female spirit was clearly and obviously presumed herself to be the ongoing mistress of the house, whether or not she was dead. And she perceived my mother as a threat. She hated, loathed my mother. She lusted after my father, and she coveted us, the 5 children. And so when she would appear to us, she would ask us to come with her. She wanted us to be with her. Well, of course, what do you do when you're a little kid? You run and go find your real mother. Don't let her take me. Please don't let her take me. It was a bizarre way to grow up, but I'll tell you what, I really do look back on that time now. And I started writing this story about 3-4 years ago. I started putting it in print. Honest to God, I hadn't been working on it a month before Hollywood came knocking. And I don't even know how they knew I was writing the story, because literally only a handful of people knew that I had finally started to tell it. I'm being the writer in the family, I'm the one with the degrees in English and philosophy. I seemed the logical choice to be the one to actually write our collective memoir. But there's a lot from all of my family in it. And I'm not the only one in my family that feels this way, but I consider that decade of life the most.
You're breaking up.
Can you hear me?
I did for a minute there. I don't know what's going on, but I noticed it a moment ago that you keep breaking up. I wonder if you're got a bad connection in a phone wire or what?
No, I don't think so. But what I will do, hold on, let me get closer to the base. I went and tucked myself in the back of the house.
Oh, okay, that would explain it. You got to
because there's people here, and I didn't want us to be interrupted. And we're getting ready for hear all the noise. We're getting ready for Thanksgiving. Woo! I get to cook the turkeys. Oh my God. Okay, so is that better? Can you hear me better now, honey? I'm right near my base.
Sure can.
Okay, very good. So anyway, as I was saying, I consider it really the best decade of my life, because I was very young and I learned at a very early age that death is nothing to fear, and that if you live your life well and comport yourself properly in this life, that you won't be an earthbound soul, that you will be able to move on to whatever is out there. But the point is, something is out there, and there's a spirituality that each one of us sense. It's real. It's not made up in our minds in a kind of wishful thinking, self-fulfilling prophecy way. It's real. And when you walk into a full body apparition of a spirit that lived 200 years before you were born, and you look at somebody that's dressed in 17th century garb that has your same features, it happened to me. I mean, I looked at a spirit that came to welcome me home from college, from my first semester of college. I had never seen her in the house before. I had never seen her in all the years that we'd lived there. And I came home for my birthday. My parents flew me home from Pittsburgh, and I was cold, and I backed up to the fireplace, and my father was in the dining room with my family, and he said, Andrea, you have company. Somebody's welcoming you home. And I felt her because the whole right side of my body turned to like a solid slab of ice, and I could only move my head. I couldn't move my body. And I remember distinctly thinking, I'm standing too close to the fire, because I had corduroys on, and I was cold, and I had gotten too close, and I couldn't move. And when he said that to me, I turned and I looked into my own face, my own eyes, from 200 years before. So there's no question in my mind that we were meant to live in that house, that there's a familial connection. And even though we've not been able to find it in terms of our own personal ancestry, either on my mother or my father's side, that's not necessarily the answer. All I know is that my sister Cindy, for all the years that we lived there, said, the little girl that walks through my bedroom crying, she looks just like you. She looks just like you. So Cindy's 5 years younger than I am. And Cindy had only seen me at the age of 5, which is approximately how we aged this little ghost. She'd only seen me in photographs because she was an infant when I was 5 years old. But she described me to a T and said, that's the little girl that walks through our bedroom crying. My sister April had a little friend, and his name was Oliver, and he dwelled in the eaves of the upstairs, what we called the chimney closet, because that's where the center chimney went through the house, and it was a very warm place, and so we used it as a little playroom for ourselves, and we'd put all of our toys in there, and he would sneak out of the eaves and sit beside her and play with her. I mean, we had relationships with our ghosts. We did.
How is it you ended up being the one out of your kids that did the book and the movie?
Well, because I'm the writer in the family. I've been writing for years and years and years, all kinds of different stuff, philosophy and short stories, and you name it, I've written it. And so I seemed the logical choice. But I'll tell you, the thing that was so strange about it was the way that it happened, because it was August of '07 when it was like a bell went off in my head, like the jingle of an alarm clock that said, it's time to tell this story now. Enough time has passed, it's time. And I had a great job. I was a psychiatric, like a youth counselor who dealt with therapeutic and psychiatric issues with adolescent boys. I worked at a private school. And I had a fabulous job, and I loved my job, and I just left it. I gave them 2 months' notice so that they could train and replace me, and I took off for Georgia so that I could be with my family here, because I was the only holdout that was still living in Rhode Island. Everybody else had moved south. And I packed up my dog and my cat and my belongings in a U-Haul, and I drove 1,200 miles and said, it's time to write this book.
Wow. So now, you say you've already completed the whole trilogy?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're releasing the next segment of it is coming out in a week or two. And then in the early spring, late winter or early spring, I'll release the third.
So what has it been like living with the poltergeists for a whole entire decade?
Well, they weren't just poltergeists.
Well, okay, but the spirit world, I'm probably going to say.
Yeah, I mean, a poltergeist has a very specific meaning. And not saying that we didn't have poltergeist activity. We had some real mischief makers in the house. They loved to embarrass us when we had company. They loved to manipulate the electronic objects in the house. They knew how to start the dishwasher. They'd open the refrigerator door and slam it so that when they pulled it back open, everything would fall on the floor. They would manipulate the television, the stereo, anything that had electricity running through it. So we had multiple incidents of that. But, those things were so commonplace for us compared to the major manifestations that happened in the house, the gut-wrenching, terrifying manifestations that happened, especially to my mother. I mean, physically attacked. My father was physically attacked. You know, we had Cindy was physically attacked. Nancy was. Christine was terrified. All of us went through one encounter after another for all these years. And, you know, the thing that's so interesting, Royce, is that when we all got together, when all 7 of us got together, and I started doing the interview process, because I had already written down a lot of my memories, things that I recalled specifically. So when I came to Georgia, it was time to start targeting my family members and seeing what they remembered as well. And I thought, oh, God, you know, when I began this isn't going to match up. It's been 30, 40 years now. Nobody's going to remember exactly the same way that something happened. And when I put it all together, when I put 6 notebooks for each one of my siblings and my parents together and did all the cross-referencing of the material and put it all down in a manuscript, when I went back through it with each one of them, I had to change one thing. I had written a story about something that happened in the fall, and I had it listed as happening in the spring. I had to change the season.
That wasn't bad.
It. You know, I mean, it's miraculous. And the thing is, because when something that incredible happens to you, it's like a freeze frame in your memory. It's impaled into your memory. And you just don't forget the details of it. You don't forget the smells and the sights, all the senses that get tapped into during the process of the encounter. And the encounters were numerous, and they weren't just in the house. They were also in the barn and elsewhere on the property. We had a 200-acre farm, and we had things happen to us all over that property. And when we went back into the history books and started doing the research, we found numerous people that had died on the property through sometimes bizarre circumstances. And, you know, when you think about it, when we bought that house, 8 generations of one extended family had lived in that house from the time that it was built in the late 1600s until we bought it in 1970. It had been passed through the same family, one generation after another, and a lot of people lived and died in that house, and a lot of them never left.
So now, did all the people prior to you and all the people after you, are they still having the haunting activity going on?
Yes, and I'm very good friends with the people who own the house now. In fact, the next book that I write will be their 25-year saga of living in the house.
Wow, they actually stayed in there with it for 25 years?
They did, but then they moved in knowing the house was haunted. They knew at that point it was infamous, and our family was. We moved, 1,200 miles away when we left that house so that we could start a new life and leave it behind us. But there are some things that, my mother said when it came time to exhume these stories that we had tried so desperately to bury for all these decades, it was remarkable how close to the surface they were buried.
Yeah, and it's amazing that people would buy a house knowing that it had all this activity and stay there and still continue to this day. They must really, I would think, be adapted to it or have a reason for it or something.
Well, they both went in with the right and proper attitude, the way that Norma entered that house. And it's funny, too, the story is that she ended up finding the house and buying the house without her husband knowing about it. My mother did the same thing. They were both drawn to the place. But she went in as a very spiritual woman, and she acquiesced instantly. She told the spirits, "We are the caretakers. This isn't our house. This is your house, and we will take care of it." And she established a very peaceful, and she didn't move in with, 5 loud, rambunctious children either. So she and Jerry have lived there for 25 years now, and they love the place. They absolutely love it. And even though they have experiences and, they've had encounters and some very similar to our own, they are acclimated to it, and they wouldn't even think of leaving. In fact, none of us wanted to leave the house. Had it not been for my mother, the last year that we were there, she looked my father square in the eyes and she said, Roger, I won't survive another winter in this house. And she meant it, and he knew it. And so they ended up selling it for a song to the abutting landowners. They should have been set for life on a piece of property like that, but they just let it go to let it go. And it was heartbreaking for all of us because as scary as the place could be, we also loved our farm, and we still feel like it's ours. It's just somebody else living there right now, but we're all very drawn to it. My mother will never go back to it. My father went back for the first time in 30 years last year. I took him, and he was immediately recognized. He was immediately approached and touched in the same way that he always had been by the spirit that loved him. And I've had numerous, oh my God, I've been back 4 or 5 times just in the last couple of years. I have photographs that are mind-blowing. I have not released any of them. I'm going to release them as I'm working with Warner Brothers around the film, so I'm not releasing anything too tumultuous until they get their promotional end squared away. But it's amazing. So just watch my website, watch my Facebook page. I want to tell people, feel free to look me up on Facebook. I've got 2 pages, my personal page, which is awesome. I've got the nicest one in all of Facebook land. And I do, because I tend to it every day, and it's loaded with beautiful photographs and, great spiritual quotations and all kinds of stuff. But if you really want to know what's going on with the book and with the forthcoming film, then like me on House of Darkness, House of Light, my other Facebook page, and it will give you access to everything as it's forthcoming. As soon as we find something, we post it.
Okay.
So there's, lots of good stuff there. I love Facebook. I'm totally in love with Facebook. I'm not one of those people that says, Facebook, and they changed this, and I'm like, whatever they do, okay, because they gave me this forum for free. And I am not going to, not one instant of ingratitude will you hear from me. So anyway, yeah, it's been a very, very interesting ride. And I've got a website that's up and running. I will have 2 closer to when the film is released, but right now I have houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com, and that has lots of goodies about the film and pictures of the...
And it will be in theaters.
Yes, it will be. Actually, it's released in the United States on July 19th. In New York City is the premiere, and then it will go nationwide and then worldwide, I'm assuming, within just a week or so after it's released.
Well, when it comes out, I'll be able to go see it free.
Yes.
Because my son works at Tinseltown, and he just slides the card, and I go in.
Oh, how sweet. Well, we're looking forward to it, and the Warner Brothers has been nice enough to, they're going to make arrangements for all of us to see it in advance, because apparently it's testing so well that it's very intense. People are actually walking out of the test screenings. And then, of course, when they do a test screening, they have to do a questionnaire post-preview. And what they're hearing from the people that are walking out of the film is it's too intense. They can't stand being in there one more second. They just, bless their hearts.
Kind of makes Paranormal Activity 4 seem like a trip to the choir.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason is because James Wan really went after this to try to capture the reality of it. It's not loaded with special effects. It's just what happened. And so, we're really looking forward to seeing it, and we're aware, of course.
And the difference between your movie, The Conjuring, and Paranormal Activity is that yours is actually based on a true story.
Yes, exactly.
Which I think makes a huge difference.
I think so, too, because, the fact is, it's not just us all these years later saying, yes, this is a true story. People have known about this for decades and decades and have pursued our family for all these years trying to get us to tell the story because only fragments of it were out. Because, of course, when Ed and Lorraine first came to the house, they realized what they were seeing. They realized what was happening in the house, and it just blew their minds. And, of course, you know, when they did different seminars and did different speaking engagements around the country and around the world, they would talk at length about their experience at the house in Harrisville. And so it had quite a reputation prior to the film being released. A lot of people in the New England area particularly knew about it. But of course, you know, we didn't share what was happening in the house because, I mean, Royce, I'm telling you, there are literally things in our story that are unbelievable. And so you have to have faith. You have to trust that there is a greater power, that there is something at work, that there is a spirit world, that there is another dimension that is mostly invisible to us, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
But you also have to overcome your fear, don't you?
Well, that's really part of it, you know. I mean, I didn't feel... Well, what do you mean exactly by that?
Well,
Before I even attempt to answer that question, what do you mean by overcoming fear?
Right. Well, what I'm looking at is that, you know, granted, some of the activity is just mischievous stuff that's really amusing. But, you know, by your own description, some of it was also more demonic, and you would think would be a lot more scary, fearful as it was going down, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, yes, yes, my mother is standing right beside me saying, yes, we overcame our fear. Yes, and you're right. You have to, in order to stay there.
Right.
We had to overcome our fear. If that's where you're going with your question.
Right. That's exactly
where I was going.
In order for us
to stay there for a full decade, yes, we had to overcome our fear.
Which I think that says a lot about you guys in itself that you was able to do that, because so many people with that kind of activity going on, they would have ran a long time before y'all ever moved out, in other words. A lot of people don't even make it for a year. I recently had a lady, wonderful woman, on my show that had a true story about an apartment she was in that was on it, and she didn't make it, I think maybe a year and a half before she had to move to get away from the activity.
Well, the thing is, too, that if they attach, they can follow you. Some people will disagree with that, but we've had other experiences. My dogs, I apologize for dog sounds. Mom, just let the dog out. Okay, I'll move to another part of the house. There's a lot of activity going on around here, and it's not supernatural activity. It's just natural.
Right. But it's Thanksgiving holidays.
Yeah, makes noise. So anyway, the thing is, I never really I don't recall ever feeling fearful in the house. I started speaking to the spirits as soon as they started manifesting. And if I asked them to go away, they would. And my approach to them was always very polite, because I assumed that they belonged there, or they wouldn't be there, that they were a natural part of the house. And so from the age of 12, I began to communicate with the spirits. And if I asked them to depart, if they were interrupting something that I was doing, they would. But my mother's experience there was quite contrary to my own. She was absolutely terrified because terrible things happened to her. Truly terrible things. Cindy was scared out of her mind. My sisters were scared out of their minds. My sister Cindy's bed would levitate, and while it was levitating, she would hear multiple voices all speaking together at once, saying, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall."
Oh, wow.
That house existed before the Revolutionary War. It was part of the Underground Railroad during the Civil War.
Okay, so see, that's why you got so much activity instead of just one spirit. as if the Underground Railroad was there. You had all the black people that died. You had all the soldiers that died. You had the people that lived in the house that died. You've been a lot of tragic deaths in this place, and who's to say anything about the Indians before that?
Mhm. Yeah. And we also had experiences with the Indians because where we lived was actually the original home of the Nipmuc Indian tribe. They owned that whole valley, the whole extended area, thousands and thousands of acres. And we many times saw Indian children playing in the woods, dressed in their garb. I mean, dressed in skins and cloths and moccasins that looked like sandals or sandals that looked like moccasins. I don't know. It appeared to be leather. But there's a whole group of children that play in those woods that are from the Nipmuc Indian tribe. And those children died in those woods. And we don't know how. We don't know if they were swept away in a flood. We don't know if they were attacked. We don't know how they died. But those children are there, and they're there now. They're all there now. They're all still there now. And when I go to the house and I pull out my, fancy camera, what I do is I just simply call them to me. They know who we are. Every time any one of us has ever gone back to the house, we've been instantly recognized. We get put in the bubble. That's what my sister Cindy calls it. We get put in the bubble where you cannot hear anything but them. And they communicate through where human mortals always say the third eye is, right in the center of the forehead. That's how they communicate. And it's interesting. I mean, some of them have telltale signs of their British accent. They came over as colonists. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But what I do is I pray and I call them to me, and then I ask their permission to photograph them. And they always give it to me, and I have captured some things on film that the world has never seen. But you will soon.
I would just imagine there's a good chance that you very well will soon.
Yeah, I want to. Well, in respect for New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers that have poured a fortune into making this film, I want to work on their timeline. So when they say, yes, go ahead, then I will.
Well, yeah, that is best because they are the experts.
Well, yeah, in terms of the film, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I could have released prior to this, but it's not something you want to hit the world with all at one time. A little bit at a time, and let the information sink in and assimilate, because human beings don't absorb information quickly. We have to process it. We're like little computers in our brains, and we have to process what's coming at us. That was the real challenge for us, Royce, was processing the information as it was coming to us. Because in the book, I described the house as a classroom. I described the house as a place where we went to learn our lessons well. And we did. And even though we had some terrible experiences there, my mother titled the book. I was about a third way into the manuscript, and I looked at her one day. And I live with my mom and my sister Christine in Georgia. And I looked at Mom one day, and I said, Mom, I'm about a third of the way through this book, and I don't have a title for it yet. And she just looked at me, and she said, House of Darkness, House of Light. It was both. It was.
I think it's a great title. I was going to mention to the listeners, though, once again, that they can find you at www.houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com and learn a lot more about it. And I also wanted to ask you, is there a name for the house if somebody wanted to Google it?
Well, the best thing for them to do if they want to see the house is to see it through me, because I've worked very hard to protect and preserve the anonymity of the people who own it. And I have a lot of photographs out there, and I will be putting more out there. But I don't want people just going to find it and showing up at the door. And that does happen to them from time to time. But I've been careful to do my part to protect them from that, because they deserve their privacy. I mean, this story didn't happen to them. It happened to us, and they just happen to be the ones that live there now. Prior to when they bought the house, several families had come and gone very quickly out of the house. The people who bought it from us, I don't think they ever even lived in it, because the woman, the married couple with children bought the house, and she had her brother go in as a contractor to start the restoration process on it, and according to the neighbors, he left screaming with the clothes on his back, left his car, left his tools, left everything behind, and went running down Round Top Road. And that was the last anybody heard about what happened to him. You know, who knows what he saw? Who knows what happened? You know, we know of several people that moved into the house and immediately said, no, this isn't going to work. A minister and his family moved in for a while. He moved out. And then the couple who bought it, and then it was vacant for a long time. So, and then they bought it. So it's, people come and go from that house, some more quickly than others.
I would imagine that some are. But you would have thought that the pastor would have been there a little longer and would have went to Jesus for help, in other words.
Well, I think they did their best. And that's all you can ask of anyone in a situation like that, because the things that you see in that house are so bizarre that it would scare away Jesus himself, I think.
Oh, wow.
It was... It's really hard to describe. The way that I wrote it like a series of stories, you know, from everybody's, you know, one story would be about what happened to Cindy in this particular incident. One story would be what happened to Christine in this particular incident. So that I, you know, tried to capture the essence of the emotional reactions from each member of my family. In Volume 3, which is my favorite of the volumes, I have a whole section that is just essays. Every single member of the family wrote an essay about their personal experience in the house, what it meant to them, how it defined their spirituality, how they coped with the information that was disseminated, and processed these events in their lives. It's a fascinating journey, and you know, my readers constantly write to me. I spend a couple of hours a day just answering my own mail, and I will do that for as long as I possibly can, because I think that if someone takes the time to read this story, the least I can do is to connect with them and integrate with them and answer their questions to the best of my ability. And they turn out to be my foot soldiers. They're the ones that are selling the book in droves, because they become so enmeshed in the story. They tell me that it's like going with us, going with our family to this house. And Volume 1 starts 6 months prior to us moving into the house, because a whole series of events took place which catapulted our family out of the suburbs of Providence and into this 200-acre estate. And everything happened precisely the way that it needed to happen in order for us to have this house. It was as if it was ordained. We could not afford this place. This was a massive estate, and we lived in a little 6-room Cape Cod in Cumberland. You know, it was meant to be. It was meant to be.
It was almost like with that kind of acreage, you had your own little small city there.
Mm-hmm.
All you needed was buildings.
Well, you know, we had a 12-room house with 3 pantries and a full woodshed and a massive barn and outbuildings and, you know, as many trees as we could ever climb, as many stone walls as we could ever walk. We had our own river. We had our own lake. We had our own, I mean, it was paradise. It was absolute paradise.
Except for the paranormal activity.
Mm-hmm, yep. But, you know, I look back on it and I can understand why the spirits that lingered and remained earthbound souls, why they didn't want to leave the place. I understand. But I will tell you one thing. One of the reasons that I wrote this book is because I felt that it was my destiny to do so, and I felt that it was the only way that I would be able to release myself from having to go back to that house again after death. I don't want to go back to that house again. I know that I have been there in multiple incarnations, and I don't want to go back. I want to be free of it. And the only way that I believe that I can be is to tell the story and acknowledge the spirits, because that's really all they ever wanted in the first place.
So, why do you think you keep getting drawn back in each lifetime?
I don't know. If I had that answer, honey. If I had that answer, I'd be sitting with a scepter on a golden throne, because only our Creator has the answer to why we were drawn back to that house. I don't know, but I do know that we were, and I know that in many respects it never left us. It never did. I mean, all of us dream about it constantly. We visit it in dreams. We visit it in person. You know, it's very much a fixed point in our consciousness as a family.
So I was about to say, has all your consciousness, pardon me, I don't know why I got tongue-tied there, but has all your family lived there in past lives as well?
I don't know. I know I have. I know that I have. And I don't know if I was the impetus and what drew the family to the house. I don't think so. I think that all of us have a connection, but I can't explain what it is. And I don't think I ever will be able to, not in this lifetime.
Yeah, it'd be pretty bad if you went back, like saying, a past life regression and found out you had, or even your family or all of y'all had something to do with the deaths of all these spirits.
Or that we were some of the spirits that died.
Well, if that would be the case, then how would you still be haunting it and be here too?
Well, isn't that the $20 million question?
I mean, that'd be kind of wicked, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And therein lies the existence of the fourth dimension. Multiple dimensions of time and space being shared in the same universe.
So you're kind of like copies of yourself in the same dimension in the same place, or different dimensions, same place.
Well, my mother had one experience there that was quite stunning. It was very late at night. I was the only one that was still up. I went into the kitchen to make her something to eat. She was putting a log on the fireplace, and she heard voices behind her, and I had just walked through our dining room. All the lights were turned off. It was completely shut down for the night. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And my mom heard voices, and she thought I was coming back. She turned around, and the room was completely lit with candles. The fireplace that had been sealed shut more than 100 years before was wide open. There was a woman cooking over it. There were children running around a hand-hewn oak table, and there were two men that were sitting drinking out of steins. And one of them looked into the parlor and saw my mother in front of the fireplace, and he took his elbow and nudged the man behind him and pointed to my mother, and my mother was the ghost. They saw my mother as though she was the ghost.
Oh, wow. That would be pretty wicked. Now, you've already answered this earlier, but the person in the chat room was away from the chat room at the moment. They want to know why it is that you don't live there now.
Well, we moved in 1980 because the house and the attachment that had formed, my mother was oppressed. The Warrens said that during the Warrens did a seance in the house that went very badly. It went terribly wrong. And my mother was taken over during that. Thankfully, she has no memory of it. But I was there, my sister Cindy was there, my sister Christine, and my sister April. Nancy was the only one from the family that was missing that night. And we all saw what happened. And we saw my mother change into something that's not of this world. And we saw the 40-pound chair that she was sitting in get picked up and thrown across the dining room, and she landed in the parlor and was unconscious for about 45 minutes. it was the last time that the Warrens came. My father summarily dismissed them and their entourage from the house. My mother went through a lot in that house, and the only way that she felt that she would survive the experience is if we sold the house and moved. And so that's why we did.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and that's, pretty dangerous thing there. It's getting about time to wrap, so I was going to ask if there's anything that we, haven't covered that you would like to cover, in other words.
Well, I just wanted to invite anybody that's interested in reading the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth before the movie comes out to either go on Amazon or they can go directly to my publisher. We decided, even though I had multiple offers to publish the book, I decided to publish it independently, all three of them, so that I could preserve the text and no editor would sit in a room and say, well, that's unbelievable, we're going to cut that out. No, sorry. I didn't write this to have it chopped into little pieces and condensed into a series of scary stories without the whole backstory and everything. So I chose the best publisher in the world, and they gave me the deal of the millennium, and Author House is my publisher. And you can go directly to them, or you can pick up the book on Amazon. Author House, I have a special arrangement with my publisher, so it's $5 less if you buy it from them, and they get it to you very quickly. And authorhouse.com is all you have to go to, and then just go to the bookstore and put the name of the book in, or Amazon's got it. It's available worldwide. It's available everywhere. Lots of bookstores carry it. It's everywhere. So just look around and ask. If you don't find it in your local bookstore, they'll order it in for you. And then, of course, when the movie hits, it's going to be omnipresent like God.
Right.
You won't be able to get away from it. So
it's a good thing about the way you went about doing your books is if they did leave something or butcher something in the movie, you got the books to tell the correct whatever the movie left out.
Exactly. And, when you consider it, the Warrens only came to our house to do their investigation. I think they were there maybe 5 or 6 times over, a period of a year and a half. So they knew some of the stuff that happened, but we were done with them by 1974, and we lived there until 1980. So there were a lot of things that happened in the house that they were not aware of. And so if you want the whole story, every detail, every description of every apparition that decided to come and make their presence known to us, then you have to read the book.
Okay. And has John Zaffis been out at all? Have y'all talked to him at all?
I haven't talked to John about it yet. The people that live there now, they're very private. They don't want a whole lot of investigating and stuff done. I mean, as far as they're concerned, that the house is haunted is a foregone conclusion, and that anybody that's coming out there is just going to get more of the same of what I've already got. So they keep pretty much to themselves. I have access to it whenever I want. So I've brought a few people. I haven't brought John Zaffis yet, although I, would certainly be amenable to that. He's got an excellent reputation. I have some other things in the work. I have lots of irons in the fire that I can't really talk about right now, but in the coming months, all will be revealed.
So you can come back to my show in the coming months and give us some more?
Absolutely. Believe me when I tell you, we just scratched the surface today.
Okay. Well, listen, I think you got my email and I got yours, so why don't you and me stay in touch?
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to do so, and I thank you very much for inviting me to talk with your listeners today, and I wish them all well, every blessing, and tell the people that are out there who are really super sensitive, that have had their own experiences, if they're having any very strange physical symptoms right now, we're at the point of transition where we're leaving the age of Pisces. We're going into the age of Aquarius. It is the new enlightenment, and it's happening now.
That's funny, because just 2 nights ago, my wife was going to sleep, and I mentioned to her that song was about the new age of Aquarius that's supposed to be coming in. Yeah. And she thought that I just thought that. I just, seemed like it to me. and I ended up looking it up for her and showing her.
We're in the middle of the ascension, the transition right now, and people that have been exposed to the supernatural, people that have, one-to-one experience with spirit. I have allergies the same way you do. I apologize.
No problem.
Are really feeling it very intensely, and it manifests in your joints. It's really a subatomic changing of your body that's going on right now. Intense headaches, pain in the joints, swelling, lots of physical symptoms and bizarre dreams and all kinds of things that, we normally don't have to deal with. But it is happening now, and I'm so glad that really the most intense part of the story is being released in Volume 2. But it was written as one solid manuscript, and it was 1,500 pages long, and it had to be broken up into 3 different books. So read Volume 1 first and then go right into Volume 2. It just picks up where the other one left off, and you will get a real sense of just how close we are to the spirit world.
Oh, I can imagine so. Well, at any rate, James just put the link to Internet Movie Database to the, Conjuring in there for anybody that wants it. I will be putting this show in the archives probably most likely over the weekend. Might be running a little late since I'm working on Paranormal Palace right now, and that's where one of my archives is at.
Mm-hmm.
But
just let me know, and then I'll post it all over the universe, too.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll be sending you about 6 links when I do get it up, one for each archive that I put it in, because it's going to be at 2 sites of mine, one of YouTube's, one of Dailymotion. Well, actually, Dailymotion, I'm going to do it twice because it lasted over an hour, and you had to break those down because they can only take 60 minutes, and one at Meet Cafe. So you'll have plenty of leaks coming from me when the time comes.
Oh, wonderful. That's so great. I'm sorry I ran over, but, I have a lot to tell you.
No, that's fine. But I was going to say, it's been a pleasure having you. I'll be more than happy to have you over again. In fact, I hope to have you come back when you want to tell us some of that upcoming stuff you can't share right now. Yes. And if I can get at the head of that list, that would really be nice.
Consider yourself at the head of the list there.
And for now, I'm going to cut you loose so that both of us, because I know this got Thanksgiving coming up Thursday, and as everybody knows, you have to prepare for Thanksgiving days in advance.
Yes, absolutely, especially when the entire family is coming. My mother and father have been blessed with 8 great grandchildren already, so we just consider ourselves blessed that we survived living at the farm, but to have lived, into their 70s now and to have great grandchildren coming is a blessing, truly.
I would like to live in that house personally because I've got a big family and it sounds like just the thing my family would need.
Well, plenty of room for sure for the spirits, for the mortals and immortals alike.
I'll just make some ghost food.
Yeah, there you go.
Spirit food. Soul food. There we go. We'll make them some soul food.
Soul food. You betcha.
But I want to wish you a happy holiday season. Once again, I want to thank you. It's been a really, a pleasure for me. And I'm going to cut you loose for now. And I want to thank all my listeners for coming. Couldn't have a show without you. And I will take up for the next show Tuesday. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, my guest is Nick Redfern, and we'll be discussing the world's weirdest places. And until then, you folks have a great weekend, and by all means, don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Thank you so much, Royce. You take care, dear.
You too now. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Where you can get her book. You can also scroll down into the chat room, and you can get the information to, where you can purchase the book right underneath her description. And in all honesty, folks, I don't have my number right in front of me, so I'm going to do this by memory and hope I get it right, because I had it on the home page of the other site. Now, I thought I moved it over here, but evidently I must not have. But I want to say it was 832 632-7904 if y'all want to call in and ask questions. Y'all can always ask questions in chat. So, in the meantime, let's talk to Andrea and get the show on the road. Andrea, how are you doing today?
I am very well, sweetie. Thank you so much for inviting me, and hello to all of your listeners. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I want to thank you for coming. It's a real pleasure to have you, and I've really been looking forward to this because, I mean, it's not often you meet somebody that lives in a, well, even on the phone or, on the Internet, in a house with this kind of poltergeist activity, like, say, the Bell Witch House, for example, and other ones like that. So this is kind of a treat for me. But,
well, Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated our house in the early 70s. We moved in. We bought the house in 1970, and we moved out in 1980. So our family was there for a full decade. And Ed and Lorraine have pursued us. Well, Ed passed away, sadly, a number of years ago, but Lorraine kept right at it because she and Ed have both said in numerous locations, in print and in the spoken word, that the investigation that they did at the Perron house in Harrisville, Rhode Island, was, and these are their words, the most compelling, most intense, and most significant investigation they conducted in a 50-year career of ghost hunting. And because of the really incredible things that happened to our family in that house, we waited 30 years to tell our story. Essentially, we needed the world to catch up with us. Sacrificed this baby to Satan in exchange for eternal youth and beauty. She was, as a young woman, a radiantly beautiful woman. And so the women in town were very threatened by her. The men looked at her with rapacious eyes. She had a reputation, and she never lived it down. And interestingly, she died in 1885. And that when the doctor did the examination of her body, it was written in the newspaper that he had never seen anything like it, that her body had literally turned to stone. She died of paralysis. An amazing story, absolutely amazing story. So she was dubbed a witch, people, and it was about 100 years after Salem had occurred, the witch trials of Salem. But that was just up the road from where we lived. That was like an hour and a half drive from where we lived. Had she been, lived in just a slightly earlier time, she could have, who knows what could have happened to her. But my father doesn't even believe that she's the one that's doing the haunting in the house. He thinks that it's Mrs. John Arnold.
Really?
Because when she speaks, her language is so archaic that he doesn't think that Bathsheba would have spoken in such archaic English. And also the apparition that would appear to us, she was hideously ugly, hideously ugly. There are no words to really describe how vile she appears. And her neck is clearly broken in her full body apparition. So since Bathsheba did not die of a broken neck, did not hang herself, but died of supposedly supernatural causes, my father thinks that it's Mrs. Arnold, and of course we'll never know. It's part of the mystery of the story itself. But there were at least, and I am no exaggeration, at least a dozen viable, malleable, communicate with the entire cast and crew, the five little girls that play us. It was surreal, let me tell you. I mean, to have a film made of your life while you're still living to see it is a remarkable thing, and it doesn't happen often, so we're all still kind of pinching ourselves around this. But the fact of the matter is that, they openly admitted they took a few liberties here and there. So if you want to know the entire story that happened to our family, you have to read the books. And it's a trilogy, so there's plenty of time yet before the film actually starts. But House of Darkness, House of Light is way more than a series of scary stories. It is the history of the house. It is the history of the spirits in the house. Yes, we had poltergeist activity. We also had demonic activity. We had one particular spirit that Mrs. Warren said was Bathsheba Sherman, who had been tried and not really tried. There was an inquest because she had, in the 1800s, early 1800s, she had apparently was accused of performing a satanic ritual on an infant that was in her care. And the baby died, and when they found, during the doctor's examination, found that a needle had been impaled in the base of its skull.
Ooh.
And had convulsions and died. And even though she was called before a court and there was an inquest, of course, it was well before the existence of any DNA evidence or that type of thing. And so she was not exonerated, but she was let off the hook because, and much like Lizzie Borden, she talked her way out of it and said she was not responsible for this. But the people in the area, that part of Rhode Island, never let her live it down. She lived a long, long, miserable life. And the word was it, the folklore was that she had.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. Pardon that little catch in my throat there. It's that time of year, and I'm down here in the south where it's real humid. Also, where we get a lot of rain. But anyway, today I'm going to be having Andrea Perron here, and she has spent several years of her childhood in a house that had a lot of poltergeist activity, and she has written, I know at least one book, maybe more, about this, and I've invited her here to tell her story about this and tell a little something about her book and give you guys a chance to, see what y'all think about it. As I understand, the Warrens, actually Lorraine and, I keep forgetting Mr. Warren's first name for some reason. I know he knew Johnny Zappas, and I remember Lorraine, but I just never talked to Mr. Warren. I think it was Ed Warren enough to remember. I was right. I got it. I don't know why, but I keep wanting to say Ed or Lawrence, and I keep getting them confused. But at any rate, Ed and Lorraine had went out there and investigated the house, and they found that it indeed had a lot of paranormal activity, and if I understand correctly, it still has it to this day. But before we get started, I wanted to remind everybody that this show is being broadcast from www.talknowradio.com because Paranormal Palace Radio got hacked, and it's not fully up and functional at this point. I still got a couple of bugs starring out of the new site, and I'm working on it. But in the meantime, until I get my regular site back, this is where I'll be broadcasting. It's a temporary instead of simulcasting at both places. Now, if y'all want to know a little bit more about Andrea, you can go to www.houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com, and she'll have all kinds of articles and information for you, as well as links to...
We wanted to be taken seriously. We did not want to be further scrutinized than we had been, and we wanted people to believe us. And so for 30 years, we didn't talk about it with anyone. We didn't give our permission to the Warrens to do a film or do a book or do anything around this story because we needed to process what happened to us. My mother and father and my 4 sisters and myself lived in that house for a full decade, and in that amount of time, we saw things that are literally empirical evidence for the existence of a fourth dimension. I have a quantum physicist who has kindly reviewed the trilogy of books that I've written. Volume 2 is coming out within a week or so. Volume 1's been on the market a little bit over a year now, and then Volume 3 will come out in the spring just prior to the film opening. 3 years ago this week, I gave Lorraine Warren and Warner Brothers Pictures permission to use some of my material and to, of course, use their material from their case files. And they have created a remarkable film. It's called The Conjuring. It will be out. It premieres in New York City on July 19th, 2013. And it was supposed to, it's done, and they were supposed to premiere it in January. However, the studio was so blown away by the test marketing on it that they decided to put it in summer blockbuster position. We have not seen the film yet. Of course, they took liberties. Of course, it's Hollywood. When we went out, our family went out to the set in Wilmington, North Carolina last March, and they were very wonderful. James Wan is the director of the film, and it stars Vera Farmiga, Ron Livingston as Vera Farmiga plays Lorraine Warren, and Patrick Wilson plays Ed Warren. And we got to meet with them, and we got to meet